The Hinterkaifeck farmhouse stood alone, swallowed by the Bavarian fields. Time had not forgiven it. Grass had grown over the foundation, but the air still carried a silence that felt alive. In 1952, 30 years after the massacre, the new owner, Karl Meissner, began repairs. He was warned by the villagers not to stay after sunset. They said the farm was cursed, that footsteps still moved on the roof at night. Karl laughed. He didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in walls, wood, and nails. For weeks the work went on quietly, until one morning, when his hammer struck something inside the attic floorboards. It wasn't metal. It was hollow. He knelt down, peeled away the rotted wood, and saw an old tin box, rusted, dusty, sealed shut with a nail through the latch. He pried it open. Inside, wrapped in an old piece of linen, was a small notebook. The pages were yellow and stiff. The ink faded. On the first page, in a trembling hand, was written, "This house listens when no one speaks." Karl felt a chill run through his body. He sat by the attic window, turning the pages slowly. Each page was filled with uneven handwriting, confessions, names, and strange observations. It wasn't a diary of one of the Gruber family. The handwriting didn't match any of the known victims. The entries began weeks before the killings. "I hear them walking below my bed," one line said. "The barn door opens itself after midnight. Mother says it's mice, but I know it's not mice." Karl couldn't move. He turned another page. "Father brought someone from the village. He says she helps him sleep. I don't think she sleeps." The handwriting changed, more frantic, as if written by a child afraid to be heard. "The voices tell me to hide in the attic. They don't like the barn anymore." The last entry was written on the day before the Hinterkaifeck murders, March 31st, 1922. "They are here again. The snow hides their steps. I can hear breathing through the walls. I don't think we will wake up tomorrow." Karl dropped the book. The pages fluttered in the air like dry leaves. For a long moment, he heard nothing but the wind outside. Then a faint sound echoed above him. 3 slow footsteps across the attic beams. He froze. The air thickened. He waited, staring into the dark corner where the light didn't reach. Something creaked, then stopped. Karl left the attic and locked the door behind him. That night, he didn't sleep. In the morning, he went to the local police station with the diary. The officer on duty, Inspector Vogt, took one look and sighed. He remembered the case. Every officer in Bavaria did. 6 people slaughtered with a mattock. No suspect, no motive, no ending. When Vogt opened the diary, his expression changed. He flipped through each page carefully, reading in silence. Then he looked at Karl and said, "This handwriting, and it matches something." He went to the back office and returned with an old evidence file, a set of notes written by Andreas Gruber, the patriarch of the family. One of the letters had a faint resemblance, but not quite the same. "This," Vogt said quietly, "might belong to someone we never found." He paused. "Or someone who was never supposed to be found." Karl left the station uneasy. When he returned home that evening, he found the attic door slightly open, even though he'd locked it. Inside, the tin box was gone. He never told anyone what happened that night, but neighbors said they saw a lantern moving through his attic window past midnight, and a shadow following it, one that didn't belong to him. The winter air was heavy over the Hinterkaifeck farm. Karl Meissner had tried to move on after finding the diary, but the silence in that house never left him. Every night he heard the roof crack like footsteps. Sometimes the sound came from inside the walls. He stopped working on the attic. He stopped sleeping upstairs. He told himself it was old timber shifting, the wind in the beams. But then the writing began again. It started on a cold morning in January. Karl went up to check the attic, and there on the table lay the diary he had given to the police. Its cover was damp, its pages curled at the edges as if freshly handled. He opened it and saw new lines written in the same uneven hand. "You brought it back. You shouldn't have opened it." Now we remember Karl stumbled back. He looked around the attic. his breath rising in the cold air. He tore the pages out and burned them in the stove. The fire hissed and went out before the paper turned to ash. That night, he heard whispering through the walls. The words were soft, broken, like the echo of a child calling for help. He pressed his ear against the plaster. The whispering stopped. Then came a knock, slow, steady, from the inside. He ran out of the house and didn't return until morning. When he entered, the kitchen chairs were overturned. The door to the attic stood open again. Inside, the diary lay on the floor. New words filled the last page. The snow hides them again. We never left. Carl went to the village priest. Father Lentz was an old man who had served in Hinterkaifeck during the time of the killings. He listened silently while Carl spoke. When Carl mentioned the diary, the priest's eyes darkened. That diary was never meant to be found, he said. It belonged to the one they never buried. Carl didn't understand. The priest told him that 7 graves were dug in 1922, but only 6 bodies were ever buried. The 7th coffin was sealed empty. No one spoke of it again. That night, Carl tried to leave the farm for good. He packed his tools, locked the doors, and stepped outside. But in the snow, he saw footprints, tiny ones, leading from the barn to the attic window. He followed them with a lantern. The prints stopped halfway. The snow was smooth after that, untouched, as if the walker had disappeared into thin air. When he came back inside, the fire in the stove had gone out. The air smelled of wet soil, and on the wall above his bed words were scrawled in charcoal. Do not let them dig again. The next morning he found small handprints in the dust of the attic floor. They were too small to be his, and yet, they moved over the same spot where he had found the diary. Carl sent a letter to Inspector Vogt. He never received a reply. The police station burned down 2 weeks later after a lightning strike. All the Hinterkaifeck files were lost. The villagers began to whisper again. They said the ghosts had returned. They said the farm was awake. Carl tried to sell the property, but no one wanted it. He stayed alone, eating little, sleeping less. The diary remained on the table, its pages now blank. Yet every time he touched it, the ink rose faintly from the paper like veins under skin. One night, the whispering turned into voices. They spoke from the walls, from the ceiling, from under the floorboards. He couldn't understand most of it, but one phrase came clear. You are not the first. The wind howled through the broken shutters. Carl fell to his knees, covering his ears, but the voices grew louder. He screamed, begging them to stop. Then everything went silent. For hours there was nothing but the sound of the clock ticking. Then came the last sound Carl ever heard, a slow dragging across the attic floor, as if something heavy was being pulled toward the door. The next morning, the milkman found the farmhouse door open. Carl was gone. Only the diary remained on the table. On the final page, a single line appeared overnight. He listened too long. The church in Weidhofen stood like a stone witness to a century of secrets. The villagers prayed there every Sunday, but no one spoke of Hinterkaifeck anymore. They crossed themselves when its name was mentioned and lowered their eyes as if afraid that speaking could wake something. Father Lentz sat alone in the confessional long after evening mass had ended. The candles had burned to stubs. The air smelled of wax and damp stone. His hands trembled as he held a sealed envelope addressed to the diocese. Inside was his confession, written over 10 long nights. He had promised never to tell, but silence, he knew, had killed more souls than sin ever could. He began his story 30 years earlier, on a winter night in 1922, when the Gruber family came to him. Andreas Gruber looked pale, his wife behind him clutching a small child. Andreas spoke first. He said he heard voices in the walls. He said tools went missing from the barn and reappeared clean in the morning. He said footsteps crossed the attic every night even when the ladder was gone. Father Lentz listened, thinking it was grief or madness. He blessed the family and told them to pray, but 3 days later, they were found dead in their barn, murdered with their own mattock. The police never solved it. The village never recovered. And the priest never forgot the last thing Andreas Gruber told him before leaving the church. She is not ours. For years, Father Lenz kept that secret. He tried to bury it beneath prayers and sermons, but guilt has a sound. It whispers when the world grows quiet. When Karl Meissner came to him decades later with the diary, the priest felt his blood turn cold. He recognized the handwriting. He had seen it once before in the old parish records, on a baptism certificate without a date, written in the hand of Andreas Gruber himself. The child had no official name. Only one word appeared beside the note of birth: attic. Father Lenz opened his diary again that night. He wrote that if anyone ever found this letter, they must never open the Hinterkaifeck attic again. But confession demands honesty, even from the damned. He remembered the 7th coffin. After the murders, the villagers helped bury the family, but when the priest arrived at the graveyard, there were 7 holes instead of 6. The coroner had ordered an extra box, though no body had been found. When Father Lenz asked why, the coroner said only one thing: because something was missing. Now, in 1952, the priest knew what it was: the missing child. The one born in secret and kept in the attic. The one the Grubers never admitted existed. He had heard it crying through the walls that spring before the murders. He told himself it was imagination. But then, on the night before the massacre, he saw a light moving across the fields toward the farm. He went out into the cold and watched as a shadow slipped through the barn door, a tall figure dragging something behind. He never told the police. He never told anyone. But the next morning, 6 people were dead, and 1 was gone. He folded his confession and sealed it with wax. But before he could deliver it, the candles flickered out. A chill spread through the church. The confessional door creaked open by itself. He heard a soft sound, a small hand brushing against the wood of the booth. Then a voice whispered close to his ear, quiet as breath: "We remember." The priest dropped his pen. His heart raced. He opened the curtain, but no one was there. Only the faint scent of soil and hay, the smell of the Hinterkaifeck barn. He stumbled toward the altar, clutching his chest. He tried to pray, but the words refused to come. The shadows in the church seemed to move. He thought he saw a figure sitting in the front pew, small, still, watching him. He raised the cross, trembling in his hand. "Leave this place," he said. The figure did not move. When the morning light entered through the stained glass, Father Lenz was found on the floor beside the altar. His face was calm, almost peaceful. The letter was gone. Only one thing was found beside him: a piece of paper torn from the same diary Karl had discovered. On it were 4 words written in a child's hand: "We never died here." The villagers buried the priest quietly. No one read his last sermon. But they say that at night the church bells ring once at midnight, even when the ropes hang still. And those who hear it say the sound comes not from the tower, but from beneath the floor. The wind that crossed the Bavarian fields was cold and hollow. It carried no birdsong, only the sound of distance. By 1961, the Hinterkaifeck farmhouse had been abandoned for nearly a decade. Grass swallowed the path leading to it, and the well had filled with stagnant rainwater. No one dared to go near it, not after what happened to Karl Meissner and Father Lenz. But one man came. His name was Emil Hartmann, a historian from Munich. He was not looking for ghosts. He was searching for truth. Emil had spent years studying rural crimes, unexplained murders, and folklore. He believed that fear created legends and that legends hid evidence. The Hinterkaifeck case, he said, was only half written. Something was missing from the official record, something that might still be in the ruins. He arrived on a gray afternoon, the fields quiet, the farmhouse leaning slightly as if tired of standing. The roof had partially collapsed, the windows were hollow, and the barn smelled of wet wood and earth. Emil stepped inside and felt the temperature drop. Dust hung in the air like fine ash. Every sound echoed: his breath, his steps, the creak of his boots. He took out his notebook and began sketching the layout. He had studied the old police photographs, the positions of the bodies, the tools, the strange details no one explained, the half-eaten meal, the footprints leading nowhere, the locked doors. But he hadn't come for the crime scene. He came for the attic. He found the ladder behind a stack of broken crates. It was old, but still strong enough. As he climbed, the smell changed. Old linen, faint mold, something metallic underneath. When he reached the top, the air grew colder. The attic beams bent low. The light came only from a narrow crack in the roof. The floor was covered in dust, but not untouched. There were marks. Thin lines dragged across the boards as if something had been moved recently. Emil crouched down and brushed the dust away. His fingers touched metal. A nail. The same kind that had once sealed the tin box. He searched around until his hand struck something else. Wood, soft with age. A small chest half buried under old blankets. It was empty except for a torn photograph. It showed the Gruber family standing outside the house. Behind them, in the attic window, a small face looked out, pale, featureless like a blur of smoke. Emil felt a pressure in his chest. He turned the photo over. On the back, in faint pencil, someone had written 3 words. "I hear them." He pocketed the photo and kept searching. Near the far corner, he found a loose plank. Beneath it, the remains of a nest. Straw, cloth, bones. Small bones. Not animal. He closed the plank, his hands shaking. The air felt heavy now, thick enough to breathe in. The silence had a rhythm like a slow pulse. Then came a sound, a faint scrape from behind him like something brushing against the wall. He turned. Nothing. Only the dark shape of the rafters. He whispered to himself that it was the wind. He wanted to believe it. But then the sound came again, closer, this time from the floor beneath him. He moved toward the ladder, but before he could descend, something else happened. The light changed. The crack in the roof dimmed, as if a shadow had passed across the sun. And then, faint but clear, a child's voice spoke. "You should not be here." Emil froze. The voice was behind him. Soft. Hollow. He turned slowly. There, near the far wall, stood a small figure. The outline of a child no more than 10, its face hidden in shadow. "Who are you?" Emil asked, his voice barely a whisper. The figure tilted its head. "We remember," it said. Emil stumbled backward. The ladder creaked. He turned to escape, but his foot slipped, sending him crashing down into the room below. Dust rose around him as he hit the ground hard. When he opened his eyes, the house was silent again. The light outside had shifted. It was nearly dusk. He stood limping, his hands trembling. The attic above him was quiet, but something about the silence had changed. It was listening. He left the farmhouse and drove back to the village. That night, he checked into the inn and tried to write down what he had seen. His handwriting shook across the page. He returned to Munich the next day and sent the photograph to a forensic lab. The experts confirmed it was genuine. No signs of manipulation. The photo dated back to 1921, but something strange appeared in the scan. The face in the window, when enhanced, showed not a child but something else. An elongated form, blurred at the edges, eyes too far apart. A few days later, Emil began hearing noises in his apartment. Scratching in the walls, the sound of pages turning. Once, he woke to find his notebook open on the desk, a message written across a clean page in faint gray dust. "Come back." He tried to ignore it. He buried himself in his research. But the photographs changed overnight. The same attic window appeared darker each time he looked at it. Shapes moved within it. He went back to Hinterkaifeck one last time in early spring. He didn't tell anyone. He brought only his camera and a lantern. When the villagers saw his car the next morning, it was still parked by the farmhouse gate. The door of the house stood open. The lantern inside was burned out. They found the camera on the floor, its film undeveloped. The attic window was open to the gray sky. The wind moved softly through the fields. Emil Hartmann was never found. Weeks later, a farmhand plowing the soil nearby discovered something buried near the old well, a single photograph sealed inside a glass jar. It was the same picture Emil had found. But now the face in the attic window was gone. In its place, standing in front of the farmhouse door, was Emil, and behind him, 6 faint shadows. The farmhouse of Hinterkaifeck stood quiet under the pale Bavarian moon. The investigators had long abandoned the case, the villagers no longer whispered its name, and the snow had buried what little remained of the truth. But on one bitter night, nearly a century later, a young journalist named Elias Bauer arrived at the ruins with a purpose: to find the missing pages of the Gruber family diary. He had read every record, every police report, and every forbidden document that remained in dusty archives. Yet one question burned in his mind. Why had Andreas Gruber written, "He is inside the house again," just days before the massacre? The locals warned him not to stay after dark. They said the farmhouse was cursed, that sometimes lights flickered where the barn once stood, and that the air still carried the echo of an axe striking wood. Elias didn't listen. He pitched his small lantern on the cracked stones where the kitchen used to be, opened his notebook, and began his investigation. Hours passed. The night deepened. Snow started to fall in soft, soundless waves. Then, from the cold wind, a faint sound emerged, the low creak of a door. But there were no doors left, only remnants of what once was. Elias's breath froze. He turned his lantern toward the sound, and in the dim circle of light he saw something glinting beneath a pile of charred boards. It was a small, rusted tin box. Inside, wrapped in old cloth, were the missing pages of the Gruber diary. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. The final entry read, April 3rd, 1922. He waits in the barn. I hear him breathe. I smell the damp earth on him. Victoria prays, but her voice no longer carries. The children have seen him too. He wears father's coat, but it is not father beneath it. The priest says it cannot be a man. He says we have sinned and now he comes for us all. Elias felt the chill sink deep into his bones. He turned the page. There were marks of blood smeared across the next lines, but one phrase stood out. He said the house is alive. Suddenly the lantern flickered. The air grew heavy, thick with a smell of damp soil and iron. The snow outside stopped falling, replaced by silence so complete it pressed on his ears. Elias tried to stand, but felt a strange resistance, as if the air itself had weight. Then he heard it. Footsteps above him, but the roof was gone. He froze, staring upward into the open night sky. Yet the sound continued, slow, deliberate, circling him. The same steps the neighbors had once reported hearing in 1922. He whispered to himself, "It's just wind." But then a voice replied, low and rasping from behind him, "It's never just wind." He spun around. The lantern went out. Only the pale moonlight touched the ruins now. His heartbeat thundered in his chest as he reached for his recorder. But before he could press the button, something cold brushed his shoulder. He turned again. Nothing. Just the collapsed barn, shadows, and snow. He gathered the diary pages, stuffed them into his bag, and ran toward the old path that led back to the village. Yet as he ran, the forest around him seemed to close in, each tree bending inward, the path twisting on itself. After what felt like hours, he stumbled into a clearing, the farmhouse again. He had not left. His recorder blinked red in his pocket. A mechanical voice said, "Recording started." He looked down. The recorder's screen showed the date, April 3rd, 1922. He dropped it in terror. The device hissed, filled with static, and from the static came the sound of breathing, slow, wet, human. The next morning, the villagers found Elias's car parked on the road, engine still warm. His footprints led to the ruins, but never back. The police recovered his bag near the well, with the diary pages intact. They confirmed the ink was authentic, written by Andreas Gruber himself. Yet one new page, written in modern pen, had been added. April 3rd, 2025. He is still inside the house. He waits for the one who listens. After that day, no one dared to visit Hinterkaifeck again. The government fenced off the land, calling it a historical preservation site. But those who live nearby say that on cold nights they see a flickering lantern deep among the ruins. Sometimes it moves, sometimes it stays still, and sometimes they hear the faint click of a recorder, followed by a man's voice whispering from the dark, "It's never just wind." No one knows what became of Elias, but the diary pages remain in police custody, sealed in Evidence Vault 11B under restricted access. Every attempt to study them has ended in failure. Corrupted data, dead batteries, blurred images. One officer who touched them swore he heard children laughing faintly behind him, though he was alone in the room. Hinterkaifeck remains silent, its story sealed by snow and time. But those who have read the last page believe the haunting never ended. It merely waits for the next one to open the book.